My name is Bianca. I'm 28 years old, and 2 weeks ago I sat in a crowded auditorium in Ann Arbor, staring at 3 empty folding chairs where my family was supposed to be. Right as they called my name for my master's degree, my mother texted me to say they couldn't make it because my sister needed help choosing imported Italian kitchen tiles. She added that my degree was pointless anyway since I didn't even have a real job lined up. I didn't cry, I took a screenshot. 4 days later, a recruiter from Apex Global called my tiny apartment in Detroit and offered me a vice president title and a $3.25 million buyout for an algorithm I had built in secret. While I was reading the contract on my laptop, my mother texted again. Family meeting tomorrow at 6. We need to discuss your future. You are going to listen. She had no idea my future had already arrived, and it was about to dismantle everything she valued. I was sitting in the Chrysler Center at the University of Michigan when I understood, with perfect clarity, that my family did not see me as a daughter. I was a prop, a useful contrast. The struggling one who made Chelsea, my older sister, look radiant by comparison. Chelsea was a luxury real estate agent married to a smooth-talking startup founder named Trent. My parents treated them like royalty. Trent threw around words like scale and disruption over expensive dinners, while my parents nodded like he was delivering scripture. 3 years earlier, my father had proudly announced over steak and red wine that he was refinancing their Bloomfield Hills house to give Trent $200,000 in seed money for his logistics startup, Velocity Route. That same month, I asked if they would help co-sign a much smaller student loan so I could finish my degree. They told me my education was a bad investment. When I questioned Trent at that dinner, asked what made this company different from the last 2 failed ventures, he smiled into his wine glass and called my work a cute nerd fantasy. My father told me to stop asking foolish questions and learn from people who understood real wealth. So I stopped talking. I worked 3 jobs instead. Night shifts in data processing, freelance coding, tutoring statistics. I paid for my predictive analytics program 1 exhausted hour at a time. And at night, in my apartment with the broken air conditioning and the rattling windows, I kept building my algorithm. It was designed to detect fraud in supply chain data, ghost activity, inflated routing claims, dummy user networks dressed up as explosive growth. And out of morbid curiosity, I started testing it against Trent's public numbers. At first I thought my code was wrong. Then I realized his business was. Velocity Route's claims were impossible. Trent bragged online about slashing delivery times across the Midwest and maintaining huge daily user activity. But the numbers didn't line up with traffic patterns, contractor density, or even physical geography. I kept digging, cross-referencing, scraping public endpoints, tracking the digital footprint. It took me months to prove what my instincts already knew. Trent was running a mirage. He was using dummy accounts and ghost nodes to fake successful deliveries and inflate performance metrics. His entire business was built to look valuable long enough to trick a larger company into buying it. It wasn't just sloppy, it was fraud. I didn't tell my family. They would have called me jealous. They always preferred a charismatic lie over a quiet truth. The night before my graduation, I drove to my parents' house in Bloomfield Hills and asked my father for one thing, $2,000. Not as a gift, a bridge loan. I needed to finish filing my patent application and cover rent. He stood in his home office with a bourbon in his hand and didn't even look at the paper I brought him. He laughed and said, "We are not funding a freeloader, Bianca." Chelsea leaned in the doorway with a glass of wine and said I was obviously jealous of Trent's success. My father told me to stop wasting time with math on a laptop and get a real job answering phones until I found a husband to support me. I folded my paper, put it back in my pocket, and walked out. That night I went home, opened my laptop, and paid the patent filing fees anyway. My bank balance dropped to $12. But I owned my work. A few weeks later, 4 days after my family skipped my graduation, Apex Global called. The CEO, Daniel Harrison, got on the phone himself. He said the logistics sector was full of founders falsifying data, and Apex kept nearly acquiring toxic companies because their legacy auditors couldn't read modern back-end fraud. My algorithm could. He didn't care that I had no corporate pedigree. He cared that my model could catch what everyone else missed. They wanted exclusive rights to the software. They wanted me. Vice President of Acquisitions, signing buyout, $3.25 million. Then he emailed the list of startups they were reviewing for acquisition. Velocity Route was number 4. I sat there in my overheated kitchen staring at Trent's company name on the screen and understood the full architecture of irony. The same man my parents funded. The same man who called my work fantasy. The same man counting on a major buyout to make himself look like a genius. And the gatekeeper for that buyout was me. The next evening, I drove to Bloomfield Hills in a slate gray suit I could barely afford, carrying a leather tote and a thick manila folder. Through the dining room windows, I could see them already seated at the mahogany table, relaxed and smiling, wine in hand, waiting to put me back in my place. When I walked in, no one mentioned my graduation. No one asked about my degree. My father slid a stack of papers across the table. A personal credit application. He explained that Trent's company was in a temporary cash flow crunch while they finalized a lucrative buyout with Apex Global. Since my parents had already tied up their equity, and I had no real prospects, they had decided I would co-sign a $50,000 personal loan for Trent. It was not a request. It was an order. Trent smiled and told me to think of it as an investment in the family. My mother said if I refused, I'd be cut off for good. No holidays, no inheritance, no place in the family. I looked at all four of them and realized they were threatening me with things they had already withheld. So I placed my manila folder on top of Trent's loan papers and opened it. First, I slid my mother's graduation text across the table. The screenshot, her exact words, that my degree was pointless, that imported kitchen tiles mattered more. She flushed instantly. Chelsea rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. A graduation was just a ceremony. Trent's business was the real future of the family. Then Chelsea bragged that Apex Global was about to buy Velocity Root for $10 million anyway, so my $50,000 was just temporary help. That was when I looked at Trent and said, very calmly, I'm not co-signing a loan for a company that is legally insolvent. The room went silent. His face changed first. The smirk disappeared. He knew exactly what that word meant. I pulled out the Apex Global contract and slid it across the table. My father snatched it up, confident he was about to expose some excuse. Then he read the title. Vice President of Acquisitions. Then he read the buyout. $3,250,000. The color drained out of his face. His hands started shaking so badly the paper rattled. My mother dropped her wine glass. It shattered across the hardwood floor and no one moved. She switched tactics immediately. Suddenly I was a genius. Suddenly they had always believed in me. Suddenly this changed everything for the family. She leaned forward and said that since I had all this money coming in, I could just give Trent the $50,000 directly. That was when Trent finally understood what the job title meant. I pulled out the audit pages next, the highlighted charts, the impossible user spikes, the routing claims that defied traffic patterns, the ghost nodes. I told them Apex had hired me to audit acquisition targets, that Daniel Harrison himself had sent me the list, that Velocity Root was on it. Then I looked at Trent and said, you built a digital mirage and tried to sell it as a company. Your buyout is dead. Chelsea screamed that I was lying. My father looked at Trent for a denial. He didn't get one. I told them I was formally recommending Apex withdraw the acquisition and report the fraud. Then I stood up to leave. My father lunged out of his chair, no longer the calm patriarch, just a desperate man with too much debt. He shouted that I had to fix this, that I owed them, that I had the power to save the family. I walked out anyway. By the time I reached Detroit, I had dozens of missed calls and voicemails swinging wildly between threats and begging. I saved every one of them. 2 days later, I submitted the audit to Daniel Harrison. Apex killed the buyout immediately and blacklisted Velocity Root internally. Investors started pulling away. Creditors started circling. Trent's empire began collapsing on schedule. Chelsea responded the only way she knew how. She posted a crying video online claiming I had suffered a psychological break, slept my way into my corporate role, and sabotaged her husband out of jealousy. The video spread fast. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years came crawling out of the walls to call me a disgrace. I didn't argue. I forwarded the video to Apex Legal and moved to a high-security penthouse in Ann Arbor. Then a business journalist picked up the story and sent a formal inquiry to Apex, asking whether executives were allowed to weaponize audits during family disputes. I drove to Detroit expecting the worst. Daniel Harrison had Chelsea's video paused on an iPad when I walked into his office. He asked me to explain. So I did the only thing that had ever protected me. I gave him documentation. The original audit, the texts, the voicemails. The proof they had tried to pressure me into financing a fraudulent company before the acquisition. He read everything. Then he smiled. He said he didn't care about family noise. He cared about bulletproof data. My work had saved Apex $10 million. That was the only story that mattered. Then he handed me an invitation to the Midwest Industry Gala at the Detroit Institute of Arts. I wasn't being buried, I was being presented. Publicly. I thought the gala would be a victory lap. I was wrong. Halfway through the evening, I looked across the marble hall and saw my parents, Chelsea, and Trent marching in like they belonged there. Trent had somehow gotten them in. He was desperate. This was his last chance. I watched them head straight for Daniel Harrison. Trent tried charm first. Then he told Daniel I had sabotaged the deal because I was unstable and bitter. My mother added her own performance, telling him I was mentally unwell and jealous of Chelsea's marriage. I stepped out of the shadows in an emerald green gown and asked, "Which part of the data is a symptom of my mental illness, Mom?" They turned around like they'd seen a ghost. My father recovered fastest. He leaned in close and hissed that I was going to fix this immediately. Before I could answer, Daniel stepped beside me and asked him, coldly, if he was threatening his executive in his presence. The circle around us went silent. Investors, journalists, board members, everyone watching. Trent tried again, said it was just a family dispute, asked for 5 minutes to show internal ledgers. I opened my clutch and pulled out one final document, a formal compliance report filed with the SEC. I said, clearly enough for the reporters nearby to hear, that Velocity Root had not just lied to Apex. It had defrauded investors using phantom accounts and offshore server manipulation. That's not a scaling problem, I told Trent. That's a federal crime. His face went white. Chelsea burst into tears. My father exploded, screamed that I had destroyed the family, and actually raised his hand like he meant to strike me right there in the middle of the gala. Daniel didn't blink. He snapped his fingers, and security moved in. I stood there and watched them all get escorted out of the Detroit Institute of Arts under camera flashes. My father red-faced and raging. Trent pale and sweating. Chelsea sobbing. My mother scrambling after them. The doors shut behind them. That should have been the end. 3 weeks later, the SEC raid happened. Servers seized, accounts frozen. Trent burned through what was left of my parents' money on criminal defense attorneys. Because my parents had leveraged the house for Trent's fantasy, they defaulted almost immediately when the buyout died. Foreclosure followed. One morning, 6 months ago now, the concierge in my Ann Arbor building called and said my parents were in the lobby causing a scene. I went down. They looked 10 years older. My father's jacket was wrinkled. My mother looked like she'd slept in her coat. The people who once measured human worth in appearances had been stripped down to panic and shame. My father started crying before I even reached them. Said they were losing the house. Said Chelsea was broke. Said Trent was facing indictment. Said I had the money to fix it. Said we were family. Then my mother dropped to her knees on the marble floor and started sobbing. And standing there, 6 feet away, I realized something important. They were not apologizing for how they had treated me. They were apologizing because they had run out of money. So I asked my father if he remembered graduation day. He didn't. He had forgotten the day that ended us. I reminded him. The skipped ceremony, the text, the $2,000 I asked for, the bourbon in his hand, the laugh, the way he told me my future was pointless. The recognition hit him like a train. My mother crawled forward, reaching for me. I took one step back. Then I told them the truth. I didn't destroy this family. I just stopped financing its delusions. I told them they had chosen their hierarchy. They had bet everything on a fraud because he reflected their own values. They ignored the truth, ignored the data, ignored me. And they lost. Then I turned to the concierge and said that if they ever came back, he should have them arrested for trespassing. I got into the elevator. The doors closed on my mother crying on the lobby floor and my father staring at nothing. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely peaceful. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my office at Apex Global, looking over the Detroit skyline. Trent was indicted last Tuesday. Chelsea filed for divorce the next morning and now sells discount cosmetics online while pretending nothing happened. My parents are renting a townhouse in a suburb they used to mock. I don't track their daily failures. I don't need to. What I carry with me is simpler than revenge. Silence can be a weapon when it's backed by proof. Family is not a blank check. Boundaries are not cruelty. Data matters, especially when everyone around you is applauding a lie. And the best revenge is not destroying the people who tried to bury you. It's building a life so solid, so clean, and so far beyond their reach that their opinions stop existing inside it. They said my future was pointless. Now it has a corner office, a skyline view, and a locked door they will never walk through again.